On a freezing November morning in 2008, a 27-year-old woman named Lena Marrow sailed a brand new lobster boat into Cutler Point Harbor, tied it to the Northwind Marine Service dock, stepped onto the pier, and handed the keys back. The boat was called Mercy Jane. Her father had bought it 10 months earlier for $415,000. It had twin electronic displays, hydraulic everything, a heated wheelhouse, a chilled hold, radar that could paint a buoy through fog, and a loan payment big enough to make a grown man lose sleep. Every fisherman on that dock knew the boat. They had watched her father polish the railings like a church altar. They had watched him bring reporters aboard the day he signed the papers. They had heard him say, again and again, that this boat was how the Marrow family would survive the next 20 years. And now his daughter was giving it back. The salesman stared at the keys in her hand like she had pulled a knife. "Lena," he said, "you cannot be serious." "I am. You know what your father paid for this boat. I know what he owed on it." That lie moved through the dock faster than weather. By noon, men who had not spoken to each other in 6 months were calling just to repeat it. By supper, every lobster shack from Eastport to Jonesport knew that Thomas Marrow's daughter had returned the finest boat in Cutler Point and chosen to run the family business with a stack of junk no sensible captain would trust beyond the breakwater. They laughed. Some pitied her. A few were cruel enough to say it out loud. Thomas had spent his life building that family's name, and Lena was going to sink it before spring. But 8 years later, the same harbor would be standing on her dock, asking how she did it. And the answer was not luck. It was not courage. It was not even the old boats. The answer was something every man on that dock had seen with his own eyes, and completely misunderstood. Before I tell you what Lena bought with the refund money, you need to understand what she had lost. Lena Marrow was born in 1981. The only child of Thomas and Evelyn Marrow. The Marrows had worked out of Cutler Point for 3 generations. Her grandfather fished handlines from a cedar skiff. Her father moved into lobster traps, then sea urchins for a while, then back to lobster when the prices recovered. They never got rich, but they stayed afloat. That was the family rule. Stay afloat. Evelyn died when Lena was 13. After that, Thomas raised her between the kitchen table and the bait shed. She learned tide tables before algebra felt useful. She could splice rope by 12, back a trailer down a crooked ramp by 14, and hear a clogged fuel line by the way an engine coughed in cold weather. But Thomas did not want his daughter trapped inside the same hard life. He wanted her educated. He wanted her sharp enough to deal with banks, buyers, permits, insurance men, and the endless paper that had started to swallow fishing from the shoreside. So Lena went to the University of Maine and studied marine business and resource economics. She came home with notebooks full of numbers and a habit her father hated. She wrote everything down. Fuel burn by hour, trap yield by zone, bait cost by tide cycle, repair time, weather delay, payment schedules, actual profit after the glamorous numbers were stripped away. Thomas used to wave his hand when she opened the notebook. "Boats don't run on pencil lead," he would say. "No," Lena would answer. "Dry controlled, but banks do." The argument that never ended was the Mercy Jane. Thomas had ordered it in January of 2008, when prices were good and everyone in the harbor believed bigger boats were the only way to survive. He put $80,000 down, financed the rest, and signed a note that ran longer than most marriages in Cutler Point. He told Lena it was for her. The new boat would haul more traps. It would run farther. It would hold more product. It would impress the buyers. It would make them look serious. Then, in September, Thomas collapsed on the dock while unloading bait. He was 58 years old. The doctor called it a heart attack. Lena called it the final payment on 20 years of pressure. When the estate papers settled, She inherited a family permit, a mortgaged house, an aging bait shed, a pickup with salt rust climbing the doors, a half-rotted 31-foot boat on blocks behind the shop, and the Mercy Jane. She also inherited the payment on it, $3,870 a month. That was before fuel, before insurance, before marina fees, before winter storage, before the service contract that required a certified technician every time one of the screens decided something was wrong. That October, Lena fished the boat because the traps were already in the water, and the Bills did not care that her father was dead. She ran the Mercy Jane from first light until dark. She learned the screens. She learned the joystick docking. She learned the computer alarms. She learned how warm the wheelhouse stayed while the men on older boats froze at the rail. And every night she sat at the kitchen table with her father's mug beside her and wrote down the numbers. By the second week of November, she knew the truth. The Mercy Jane was beautiful. It was also a cage. The night before she returned it, Lena invited her father's older brother, Cal, for supper. Cal Marrow was 64, barrel-chested, and shaped by 40 years of weather. He had fished with Thomas when they were boys, fought with him when they were partners, and cried once at the funeral when he thought no one was looking. Lena made fish chowder and set out the last bottle of whiskey her father had kept above the fridge. After dinner, she slid a folder across the table. Cal opened it. At first, he did not understand what he was looking at. Then his face changed. "You are not doing this. I already called Northwind. Lena, the contract has a first-year trade-back clause. Dad negotiated it because he hated being trapped. They owe me 77% of the purchase price if I return it before January." Cal looked down at the paper again. That clause was for emergencies. This is an emergency. No, an emergency is fire. An engine block through the hull. A storm. This is grief making decisions with a calculator. Lena did not flinch. The boat costs more every month than Dad and I used to live on for half a year. That boat is the future. Not if I have to fish scared. Cal sat back. There are sentences that can turn a room quiet because everyone knows they are true. That was one of them. Lena opened her notebook. "Do you know what it costs me to leave the dock in that thing? Not a season. Not a month. One day. Fuel, ice, insurance, loan, service reserve, depreciation. I have to catch a good day just to buy the right to try again tomorrow. That is fishing now. No, that is financing now." Cal stared at her, the way men stare at a storm line they do not want to admit is coming. "What are you buying instead?" she told him. He closed his eyes. "Good Lord, Lena. I can run them. I can fix them. I can pay cash for them. You will be the joke of this harbor. I know. They will say your father would be ashamed." Her mouth tightened at that, but she kept her voice level. "My father did not die because he was weak. He died because every season asked him to gamble more to keep the same life. I am not gambling his name on a boat I cannot afford to watch break." Cal looked at the notebook. He looked at the whiskey. Then he looked at the empty chair where his brother would have sat. He did not agree. But when he left, he hugged her so hard she could barely breathe. The next morning, Lena sailed the Mercy Jane back. Northwind Marine's owner, Doug Penrose, came out of his office in a wool coat and polished deck shoes. Doug had sold Thomas the boat. He had shaken his hand for the newspaper photo. He had described the Mercy Jane as the future of independent fishing. Now he tried to smile. "Lena, let us talk inside." "No need. Your father was proud of this vessel. My father was proud of me too. Those two things are not the same." She handed him the keys. Doug looked at them, then at the boat, then at the cluster of fishermen pretending not to watch. "You understand, he said quietly. "This refund will not make you whole." "I am not trying to be whole." "What are you trying to be?" Lena stepped back from the boat and looked at it one last time. "Free enough to make a decision." That was the line nobody understood. The refund check came to $319,550 after penalties, inspection fees, and a small repair charge Doug made sure to include. Here is what Lena bought. She bought a 1977 cedar over oak lobster boat with a single mechanical diesel engine for $34,000. It had peeling paint, a stubborn throttle, and an engine room clean enough to eat from. She bought a 1984 fiberglass workboat for $22,500. It had no charm whatsoever, which is sometimes the best thing a working boat can have. It started every morning, burned little fuel, and turned easily in tight water. She bought a battered 22-foot skiff for $6,800, perfect for setting shallow traps when weather made the bigger boats foolish. She paid $18,000 to rebuild her father's old 31-foot boat behind the shed. New planks where the rot had spread. Rebuilt injector pump. New bilge pumps. Used hauler. Fresh wiring. Not pretty. Honest. 4 boats. $81,300. Then she bought used traps, line, buoys, a spare hauler, 2 rebuilt diesel pumps, a trailer, a second-hand ice machine, and enough parts to turn one corner of the bait shed into a working repair shop. Another $57,000. She put $95,000 into a reserve account at Cutler Savings Bank. She used $70,000 to pay down the house note and old business debt her father had carried like a stone in his chest. She kept the rest for bait, fuel, insurance, and the first ugly surprise. On paper, it looked ridiculous. A woman had traded one nearly new $415,000 boat for 4 old vessels, a shed full of used gear, less debt, and a savings account. To the harbor, that sounded like failure dressed up as math. To Lena, it was the first time since her father died that the numbers let her breathe. The first season proved nothing at first. That was the hardest part. Spring came raw and late. The harbor stayed gray. The gulls screamed over bait barrels. Men in newer boats backed out before dawn, with heated cabins glowing orange and radar spinning over their roofs. Lena left in the old cedar boat, wearing 2 sweaters and her father's cracked oilskin jacket. The heater barely worked. The deck leaked through 3 seams. The radio had a hiss she could not chase down. Every time she passed the fuel dock, someone had something to say. "Going to the museum, Lena? Tell us if the engine needs a priest. Your father's boat had cup holders. That one have a floor?" She did not answer. She set fewer traps than the big boats. She ran shorter routes. She fished close ledges other captains ignored because they were too awkward for bigger hulls and too shallow at the wrong tide. Moved gear by hand when a smarter captain would have waited for a part. By June, the jokes had sharpened, because the Mercy Jane had been resold to a man named Bryce Gannon, and Bryce made sure everybody knew it. He was 39, loud, confident, and new to Cutler Point money. He renamed the boat Silver Crown, and kept the hull polished so bright it looked expensive even in fog. One morning, Bryce pulled beside Lena at the fuel dock while she was tightening a hose clamp with a screwdriver. "Still playing captain," he called. Lena did not look up. Bryce laughed. "You know what your problem is. You are trying to win tomorrow with yesterday's tools." Lena wiped her hands on a rag. "No," she said. "I am trying to survive tomorrow with tools I understand." He laughed harder because it sounded like weakness. By July, the harbor stopped laughing for a different reason. Fuel prices jumped. Then bait prices jumped. Then a storm pattern parked itself offshore, and turned perfect fishing windows into short, mean gaps between rough days. The bigger boats could run farther, but they had to run farther. Their payments did not shrink when the weather did. Their insurance did not care about fog. Their electronics did not care about cash flow. Every missed day cost them twice. Once in lost catch, once in bills that kept coming. Lena missed days too, but missing a day did not put a hand around her throat. She could wait for a better tide. She could run the skiff when the bigger boat was wasteful. She could fish close when others chased deeper water just to justify their equipment. Then came August. Not the dramatic kind of disaster that makes the evening news. A quieter kind. The kind that ruins people one invoice at a time. Saltwater got into a batch of control modules on 3 newer boats, including Bryce's Silver Crown. The boats did not sink. They did not explode. They simply refused to cooperate. Alarms screamed. Hydraulic systems locked out. Screens froze. Engines dropped into limp mode, because a sensor somewhere had decided caution mattered more than catch. Northwind Marine's service dock filled up in 2 days. Doug Penrose had 2 certified technicians, and 11 boats waiting. Bryce lost 4 fishing days during a stretch when the traps were full. Lena lost half a morning when the old cedar boat would not start. She traced it to air in the fuel line, bledded herself, and left the dock before lunch. That was the first time Cal said it out loud. He was standing on the pier, watching her clear the harbor while Bryce cursed at a silent screen. She might not be crazy. Nobody answered him. By September, Lena's ledgers began to show something the harbor could not see from shore. Her gross revenue was smaller than the biggest boats. Her net was not. She was not winning by catching everything. She was winning by not bleeding. But the year was not done testing her. In October, a hard blow came down from the northeast and hit the harbor at 3 in the morning. Lines snapped. A float tore loose. 2 skiffs broke apart against the rocks. Lena's rebuilt 31-footer came off its blocks at the repair dock, slammed sideways into a piling, and punched a hole below the waterline. By dawn, half the harbor had heard. By noon, the rumor was already polished. Lena was finished. She had gambled on junk, and the junk had answered. The insurance adjuster looked at the damage and offered a number that would not cover half the repair. The bank manager suggested, very gently, that if she needed a short-term operating loan, they could discuss terms. Lena thanked him and said no. For 3 days, she slept in the bait shed on an old cot. Cal worked beside her. So did 2 retired fishermen who had owed Thomas favors and had never liked admitting it. They patched the hull, replaced the pumps, braced the ribs, and got the boat floating again before the next tide cycle would have made the damage worse. It cost her $11,600. It came from the reserve account. Not a credit card. Not a banknote. Not a desperate sale. The reserve. That was the moment Lena understood the real thing she had bought. Not boats. Time. And time is the one tool a desperate person never has. By December, the season books were closed. Lena sat at the kitchen table, where her father used to argue with her, and laid out every receipt, every landing slip, every repair, every gallon of fuel, every pound sold. Her total catch had not led the harbor, not even close. But after expenses, after repairs, after insurance, after paying herself modestly, after setting aside money for taxes, Lena had cleared more than boats twice her size. The difference was not romance. It was cost. Bryce Gannon's Silver Crown had earned more on paper and kept less in reality. 2 other captains quietly extended their loans. One refinanced his house. Another sold a permit share to cover a winter engine bill. Lena ended the year with no new debt, 4 working boats, a repair shed, and enough cash to choose what kind of season came next. That is the part most people miss in stories like this. They want the dramatic victory. They want the old boat to outrun the new boat in a storm. They want the arrogant man humiliated at the dock. But the real victory happened in a ledger. It happened in the space between what came in and what had to go out. Over the next 7 years, Lena built quietly. She did not expand fast. She expanded when the numbers gave her permission. In 2010, she bought a small cold storage room behind the old sardine cannery for cash at an estate sale. It smelled like rust, brine, and bad decisions. But it let her hold product for better buyers instead of taking the first dock price offered. In 2011, she helped form a tiny co-op with 3 other small captains. They were not big enough to bully the market, but together they were big enough to stop being bullied every Tuesday morning. In 2012, when a warm water shift changed where the catch gathered, Lena was ready because she had kept 9 years of bottom temperature notes in pencil and waterproof ink. The bigger boats chased last year's grounds. Lena moved early. In 2013, when bait got scarce and prices went ugly, she had already been testing alternatives on a small scale. Not because she was a genius, because she had enough margin to experiment without risking the month's payment. In 2014, she bought the bait shed next door when its owner retired. Not with a loan. Not with a partner. Cash. By 2015, Lena Marrow owned 2 docks, part of a cold room, 5 paid-off working boats, and a reputation nobody in Cutler Point knew how to insult anymore. The old joke had become an uncomfortable fact. If your engine died, you called Lena. If your son wanted to learn how to track actual profit, instead of bragging about gross, you sent him to Lena. If a banker wanted to know whether a small fishing operation could survive without chasing bigger debt, they asked for Lena's numbers. She still wore the same cracked oilskin jacket when it rained. She still ran old boats. She still wrote everything down. Then, in the fall of 2016, the State Marine Extension Office organized a coastal resilience tour. They wanted to show reporters, students, policy people, and a few nervous bankers what independent fishing could look like when it did not depend on endless expansion. For the first time, they put Lena's operation on the route. The morning of the tour was clear and cold. The harbor looked scrubbed clean. The new boats shone in their slips. Lena's fleet sat lower, duller, and less impressive at first glance, until you looked closer. Every boat was working. Every line was coiled. Every engine hatch was labeled. Every spare part had a place. A reporter from Portland asked Lena the question everyone wanted answered. What made you return your father's new boat? Lena stood beside the old cedar boat, the first one she had bought after the refund, and took a long moment before answering. My father thought he was buying security, she said. But what he bought was dependency. Dependency on the bank. Dependency on certified technicians. Dependency on fuel prices. Dependency on perfect weather. Dependency on catching enough every month to feed a payment before he fed himself. The reporter asked, So the old boats made you safer? No, Lena said. The old boats made me responsible for my own risk. That is different. She pointed across the harbor to a row of newer vessels with radar domes and bright white cabins. A big boat can be a good tool. Electronics can be good tools. Even be a useful tool if you know exactly what it is buying you. But a tool becomes a trap when it takes away your ability to say no. That line made the evening news. A week later, a professor from the university called and asked if Lena would share 8 years of operating records for a study on small fleet resilience. Lena agreed on one condition. No inspiration story, she said. Use the numbers. The study did. It found that small operators with lower debt, repairable equipment, diversified landing strategies, and cash reserves survive price shocks and weather interruptions better than larger operations with higher fixed costs. The study did not call her Lena. They called her Case Boat 7. But everyone in Cutler Point knew exactly who Case Boat 7 was. And then there was Doug Penrose. Northwind Marine had not collapsed, but it had changed. The market for bigger, financed boats had slowed. Too many captains were upside down. Too many trade-ins sat unsold. Too many service calls began with a computer and ended with a man staring at a bill he could not pay. Doug came to Lena's dock one gray afternoon in November of 2016, 8 years after she had returned the Mercy Jane. He looked older. His coat was still expensive, but the confidence had gone out of the shoulders. Lena was in the repair shed, rebuilding a pump with grease on her hands. "Lena," he said. "Mr. Penrose." He looked around the shed, at the labeled drawers, at the old engines, at the parts wall, at the boats outside, all paid for, all working. "I owe you an apology." She waited. "I thought you were making an emotional decision. I thought grief had turned you reckless. But you saw something I did not want to see." Lena set the wrench down. "What did I see?" Doug swallowed. "That the boat we sold your father made sense for our business before it made sense for his. There are apologies that ask for forgiveness, and there are apologies that finally tell the truth. That one did both." Lena wiped her hands on a rag. "My father signed the papers." "Yes," Doug said. "But I helped him believe the payment was proof he was moving forward." She looked past him, toward the harbor. For a moment, Doug saw Thomas in her face, not in the shape of it, but in the refusal to look away from something hard. "What do you want me to say?" she asked. "Nothing," Doug said. "I just wanted you to know you were right." Lena almost smiled. "I was not right about everything." Doug looked surprised. "No? No. I thought I was buying old boats because they were cheaper." She glanced around the shed. "What I was really buying was the right to be wrong and survive it. That is the lesson nobody at the harbor forgot. Not that old is better than new. That is too simple, and simple lessons are usually lies. The lesson was that control matters more than appearance. A beautiful tool that owns your choices is not progress. A rough tool you can understand, repair, and pay for can be a doorway. Lena did not save the Marrow name by honoring every decision her father made. She saved it by understanding what he had been trying to protect underneath those decisions. He did not want the Mercy Jane. Not really. He wanted his daughter to have a future. He wanted her to stand on a dock without fear. He wanted the family to stay afloat. And in the end, Lena gave him that. Not by keeping the boat he bought. By returning it. Years later, when young captains came through her shed, she would show them the old notebook before she showed them an engine. On the first page, in her father's handwriting, there was a sentence he had written long before the Mercy Jane, back when he still trusted small things. "The sea does not care what you owe." Lena had underlined it once. Then, underneath, in her own handwriting, she had added another line. "So do not owe more than you can lose." That was the whole story. The woman who returned a $415,000 fishing boat did not trade down. She traded out. Out of panic. Out of payments. Out of a future someone else had sold to her father with a polished deck and a promise. What she bought instead was not 4 old boats, a pile of used gear, and a repair shed. What she bought was time. Choice. Margin. The right to wait for weather. The right to refuse a bad price. The right to fix what broke with her own hands. The right to fail one Tuesday and still be standing Wednesday morning. And for a working family, on a working coast, that is what freedom actually looks like. Not shiny, not impressive, not new, just paid for, repairable, and still there when the storm passes. Thank you for watching until the end. If this story stayed with you, subscribe for more stories about ordinary people who saw what everyone else missed. And before you go, remember this. Sometimes the thing everyone calls a step backward is the first honest step toward owning your life.